How do you charge your clients? Are you like many other criminal defense that basically the retainer, or do you bill by the hour?
We are strictly a flat fee business model. It was, at the time I left the firm I was at in Wichita, I don't post a lot on LinkedIn, but I think, post about this at one point. I got to the point where I really felt very burnt out. In the moment, I attributed a lot of that to just the work. I kind of specialize in high stakes, high complexity types of high severity cases. And when you have a whole caseload of those types of cases, you can imagine there's some stress that goes along with it. And so at the time, I really attributed most of it, my burnout, to that, although I knew there were some other kind of things going on. It wasn't until I left the firm and had been out for a while that, time and space gives you some perspective on things, that I realized one of the big issues I had was the billable hour model for a number of reasons. Because of my background or whatever it is, I tend to try to find the most efficient ways to do things. And which means that a lot of times I can do things because I'll adopt some tool or some other technique or something that allows me to accomplish the work I need to do in less time. Well, obviously, there's a disincentive there to be efficient and to find better ways to do things.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This is a podcast where I get to interview founding attorneys and hear about their journeys and lessons they've learned along the way. And today, my guest is Trevor Riddle. He is a criminal defense lawyer. His firm is Triad Legal. They've got offices in a couple states. We'll dive into some of that. But Trevor, thanks for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to learning about your journey.
Yeah, Jonathan, I appreciate it. I was thrilled that we were connected by a mutual friend. I've been listening to the podcast for a couple of years now and gotten great insight from it. So my goal is hopefully I can provide something of benefit to the audience.
I'm sure you will. So you've done a few different things in your career. We'll touch on some of those. So I'm looking forward to that. So as I mentioned, you are currently a criminal defense lawyer, but you've tried your hand at some other things too. So why don't you tell us a little about, maybe how you started and sort of how you got to where we are now. And then we'll unpack that, but give me a high level.
Absolutely. Well, I'll maybe clarify one and say that I am a criminal defense lawyer. I think at this stage in my life, I've come to terms with the fact that that's who I am. It's where my passion lies. So that's what I do. I've been practicing, I'm in my 21st year now. Licensed in Kansas and Oklahoma. The vast majority of my career has been spent in the criminal justice system. I started when I was in law school as a law clerk at the local prosecutor's office. After graduation, passing the bar, I worked for a small county attorney's office in a small county in Kansas and worked there for a couple of years. Realized at some point in there that the prosecution side was probably not going to be a long-term career path for me, and was just lucky enough to get an opportunity to work at a really prestigious boutique firm in Wichita, Kansas that was focused solely on criminal defense, and spent the next 14 years there.
So let me ask, did you always want to be a criminal defense lawyer, or was this something that you sort of fell into? And I ask because some people, they know what they wanted to do, but since they were 12, and then others, it's sort of like, well, I just sort of fell into it. What was it for you?
Not only did I not know I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer, I didn't know I wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, I never wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't have no lawyers in my family. I come from a family really of educators, and my mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher early in his career, later went into engineering. So they both have science and math backgrounds. I thought from an early age, I wanted to be a doctor. I remember from 8, 9 years old, knew that I wanted to be a doctor, and so I have a background in math and science because of that, because of my parents. So, and went to college. I was a pre-med student, started taking all of the biology, science classes, and was on my way to becoming a doctor. And then I realized that the path to becoming a doctor was 10 plus years in length and several $100,000 in student loans, and thought, maybe I should find something else to do. The next kind of natural thing for me then was to be an engineer. So I went from pre-med to engineering, and again, math and science classes, physics and calculus and those kinds of things. But again, law was never even on my radar. It wasn't until I found my way into the philosophy department and a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a year under my belt in the master's program in philosophy that I found my way to law school. So I fell in love with philosophy for all kinds of reasons we can talk about. Thought I was going to be an academic. I was working kind of on the PhD track, got into the master's program, was a teaching assistant, and taught a couple of freshman level classes, and I enjoyed it, and actually somehow managed to get pretty good student reviews, but realized it was probably not a long-term career solution for me. And again, as kind of the theme of my life, was lucky enough to have an advisor sit down, had a discussion with him. He said, well, have you ever considered law school? I said, absolutely not, but tell me more. I had no idea what the good law schools were. I didn't know how you applied. I didn't know what the LSAT was. I didn't know anything. He's, kind of explained it to me. He said, go study for the LSAT, go take it, see what you get, come back and talk to me. So picked up a study guide, took the LSAT, I guess got a good enough score to get into a decent law school, and here I am.
Well, we'll say it's a lot harder to make money as a philosopher than as a lawyer. But, the folks I went to law school with that were philosophy undergrad did really well. So I imagine you did pretty well in law school. I'm just guessing. Something about...
I think it's the thing that got me through the LSAT for sure, because one of my areas of interest in the philosophy department was symbolic logic. And so, they were basically training me to take the LSAT. I didn't know it at the time,
Kicked ass on the LSAT, I'm sure. All right, so back to the criminal law. So you sort of fell into criminal law. So, you started in, I guess, the prosecutor type role and then switched to the defense. Have you always done criminal law after you started, or have you experimented with anything else along the way?
So 2021, I was 14 years at the firm I had been in Wichita. Needed a change. So my wife and I left the firm. My wife and I somewhat circuitously found our way back to Tulsa. And, in the kind of vein of fresh starts, decided to set criminal law aside for a while and took up estate planning.
So how do you do that? So, I mean, look, I love pivots. I do. And I think lawyers can pivot. And I've seen lots of people do that. But that is an extreme pivot from going from criminal law to basically moving to, I don't know how many folks you knew there, but switching practice areas, moving towns.
Yeah, I will tell you, it was very, despite having, at that point, 15 plus years of experience, is still very naive in terms of what it would take. My wife and I are both, we grew up in Oklahoma. My wife's from Tulsa. So we kind of thought we're coming home. It'd be easy. It was not. We hadn't lived here in 20 plus years. And so it was literally moving to a brand new city. Yeah. And taking up a new area of practice in a solo setting. So yeah, it was far more difficult than I ever thought it would be. Yeah. Lucky enough, story of my life, I had a colleague that I had actually met, lived in Idaho, and had a kind of similar career path as me. He started off in working in a public defender's office and had worked there for 10 plus years. Burnout. He and his wife moved to Idaho from California, and he took up estate planning. And I was like, okay, well, how do you do it? And so he kind of took me under his wing, so to speak, and said, here's how you get started. And so I kind of modeled my solo practice after that.
So how did it go? So again, you sort of moved to a new city. I'll say it's a new city. You hadn't been there forever. You probably don't know that many people, probably don't know that many lawyers. I mean, maybe a few. you switch practice areas. How do you spread the word? How do you get clients? How did you figure it out?
I'd love to say that I had it all figured out, but if that were the case, I may still be doing estate planning. But, look, I made a lot of mistakes. As someone who is ever interested in technology, I kind of thought, again, I was going to have a solo practice. Being able to do estate planning meant I could probably have a virtual practice. I was going to rely on technology, digital marketing, and the clients would just come flooding in. About 6 months into it, I realized that was not entirely working. And so I had to kind of go back to, essentially basic principles. My prior firm in the criminal defense world, our best cases, best clients came from referrals. And so I said, how do I start trying to generate referrals? Where's my market at? And it just so happened my wife's a real estate agent and had signed up with a brokerage here in Tulsa. And I just reached out to him and said, hey, I'm doing estate planning. There's overlap with real estate. You may have clients who buying or selling a house that's in a trust. How do you handle those types of transactions? I'd love to come in and give your agents some continuing education. So put together a continuing education class and went to one real estate agency that my wife's working at, gave a presentation. I got a few referrals, reached out to some of the other agencies in town, said, hey, I have this course that's pre-made. I've already given it to your competitor down the street. I'd love to come give it to your agents. So that was kind of how it started, was just trying to find the people who knew who my clients were and where I could find them, and I tried to connect with those people.
That is a tried and true approach. So yeah, it works. Anybody out there, it's figure out, it's much easier to reach out to the people that then know lots of your potential client than to try to find your potential client, and then you sort of magnify your reach that way. So yeah. Okay, so you did that for a while. You obviously you tried the trust and estate thing, but you're not doing that anymore. You're back to criminal law. So at some point you said, all right, I'm going to give that up or move back to criminal law. So take me through that process. What pushed you back? And I guess probably, was this 2021 when you switched? Was this around the COVID time, or were we done?
So we moved back to Tulsa. I left my firm in July 21. So coming out of COVID, but we had, certainly one of the triggering events for us was living through COVID and some of those things. But so coming out of that, we moved back to Tulsa in February of 2022. And that's when I formally started my practice here in June of 22.
And so you did that for a while, and then you pivoted back to criminal. Tell me about that sort of decision and what led to that.
Yeah, I had started, again, through connecting with real estate agents, those connections and other connections. It started to kind of get some traction and get a steady enough inflow of clients that, in this purely solo, super low overhead virtual practice could kind of see things going in the right direction. But, as I joked when we started this conversation, I am a criminal defense attorney. And, that's where my heart is. That's where my passion is. And it was probably early October 2023. I was in the office here at home doing something, drafting power of attorney or a will or who knows. I don't remember what it was at the time. And I remember it was in the evening. My wife was in the living room. And I walked out of the office and went in. I said, would you think I'm entirely insane if I told you that I want to go back to criminal defense? And we've been together 23 years now, so she knows. And she, without missing a beat, looked at me and said, I don't know what took you so long. So that was the moment. And the next day we sat down and said, all right, what's it take to switch gears? What's it take to pivot back again and go do the thing that I'm passionate about? And off we went.
I love that. Again, it's funny when I think many lawyers go through this sort of process where you do this thing for a while and you're like, yeah, I just don't like this. I'm going to try something else, whether it's in the law or out of the law or whatever. And then you do that for a little while and you're like, well, what? I sort of really did like the thing I was doing before. So you go back. And so you decided to go back. Well, let me ask. So you're full in criminal now. Do you still do any wills, trust and estate work, or is that complete? Are you done?
I am done. I'll leave that to folks who have the more patient, laid-back mentality to life than me. So it was great. I mean, the client, clients come to you. They're not, cops aren't banging on their door with a search warrant. Everything's very much more relaxed and easygoing. And apparently I need that kind of excitement in my life. So I don't do that anymore. I have something that came out of that practice was a kind of a side project, a more technology-based platform that my wife and another co-founder are working on when we find time related to estate planning, but I don't do any actual practice at all in that area anymore.
Yeah, you don't get the same adrenaline rush I'm sure you get from the criminal practice. Okay, so you pivot back. So then the question is, so is it still with your own law firm, or did you pivot and then you founded Triad Legal? Tell me sort of that timeline.
Yeah, again, timing is everything in life. That was so early October. I said I'm going back to criminal defense, made the pivot to kind of get things going here. Because of my experience, I was able to get on what they call the CJA panel, which is for private court-appointed work in federal court. There's plenty of that here in the eastern part of Oklahoma. So I started doing that, and then strangely enough, I got a call not long after I'd made the pivot back. Got a call from a former client in Wichita who had found themselves in some pretty serious trouble and asked if I could help them. And I said, as a matter of fact, yeah, I think I can. Ended up driving up to Wichita to meet with a client, and either that day or shortly after that, ran into my now founding partner at Triad Legal, who was my colleague at the prior firm I was at. He was still there, but was contemplating a move of his own. And we said, we work well together. We've always kind of complemented each other in our personalities and our working styles, and said, well, let's join up. And we've already got a couple clients, and let's see what happens. And so we partnered and formed what is now Triad Legal.
So anybody that knows me knows that I love a good trade name for a law firm. So how'd you come up with Triad Legal, and what was the thought process behind it?
When my partner and I kind of sat down one night over a couple of beers to kind of talk founding principles for us. What is it we wanted this firm ultimately to be, what we wanted it to represent, what we wanted it to be for us. We both knew that we didn't want this firm to be a direct reflection or directly tied to either of us individually. We wanted ultimately to have, at some point down the road, a business that had value separate from us, that whether we would ever sell it or not, who knows, but that we could. And so the idea of not having our names on the sign outside kind of was the genesis of that. We tossed around a few ideas, and I like to say there's some great theme behind where it came from, but my solo practice firm, the marketing agency I'd worked with when we kind of come up with some branding material, had a set of 3 interlocked triangles. And we just kind of let's keep the logo because I've already spent the money on it. Okay, what's that look like? Triad Legal. We kind of, after the fact, came up with a philosophy kind of tie in with it, ethos, pathos, logos mentality. But if I'm being honest, that was kind of after the fact. We looked at the triangles and went, Triad sounds good.
So the thing you mentioned that I think is really important for anybody out there that is thinking about a partnership is it's the meetings and the discussions before the partnership. And it's really hugely important. I don't think enough people spend enough time on that process. So maybe take me through that. How did you come to do that, or why did you do that, and how long and what types of discussions did you have?
The first discussion took place pretty informally over a couple of beers at a local restaurant to kind of understand each other, where we were at in our lives and what we were looking to do, just to make sure that there was some kind of initial fit in where we wanted to take things, our lives personally and professionally. And then once we kind of understood each other, felt like we were on the same page, we had a series of meetings over the next couple of months where we sit down and literally, pen to paper and said, what's this thing look like? What's it look like? What do we want it to be? How do we want it to operate? How do we want to operate with each other? I'm not going to say that we covered everything we probably should have covered, but we did spend a lot of time making sure that we were aligned in terms of our personal goals, professional goals, and ultimately what we wanted this business to look like and what we wanted it to achieve for us, again, individually and as a partnership.
So I'll say, for people out there listening that have not gotten into a partnership yet, but are thinking about it, what you just said was gold. I mean, it really was. So it's more than, hey, we can come together, make a bunch of money or whatever. It's vision, personal and professional, because they blend together. People that want to, some people want to work 2 days a week and, play golf or do whatever. And then the other person wants to grow the biggest firm in the world. And those two things are not going to last.
Yep.
And so it's better to have that discussion on the front end and sort of figure it out before you go shake hands and get married, so to speak, than figure it out several years in. So really.
It is the business equivalent of getting married. I mean, you're getting into a relationship with somebody, and if it doesn't go well, getting out of it can be ugly and cost a lot of people a lot of time, a lot of money. So it makes a lot of sense to make sure that, again, before you jump into that business marriage, that you are aligned with your partner.
And so another interesting thing about your firm and the genesis and partnership is that you started with 2 offices, right, in 2 different states. I mean, you went from immediately one, hey, let's make this 2 states. So tell me about how you guys have sort of integrated the 2 offices, and how do you make it work long distance, so to speak?
Yeah, again, some of that goes to my own stubbornness or naiveness about things. And I do recall when we sit down and said, yeah, we have offices and we can start this firm immediately with offices in 2 states. Looking back on it, would I have done it the same way? I'm not sure, but we kind of jumped in that way, and that's the way it's worked out. We knew that because we were going to be in 2 different states, 2 different cities, and also because part of our thing we knew we were on the same page about was that we wanted, at least as we got the thing going, to make sure we kept our overhead low, to make sure we were kind of, as we said, lean and mean, to make sure that we were making use of every dollar we spent. So we had, I have a co-working space here I was officing out of. My partner in Wichita, we had essentially an executive office space there we were officing out of. And we knew that we were going to need to incorporate some technology. I was thrilled about, because I'm a self-professed technology nerd. I love everything new and shiny on the technology front. So that was music to my heart. A founding partner was willing to come on and trust me that we could make it work. And so we knew we were going to need to incorporate some new tools on the technology side to allow, again, just simple communications daily, things like that. So that was a big part of it. And then another part was recognizing that, if we're going to be in 2 separate cities, when it comes to finding talent to help us, be it legal assistance, marketing, operations, whatever it was, we could look far and wide. And so one of our very first hires, we found on the Upwork freelancer site, a young man out of the Philippines who's now technically his title's my executive assistant, but he does a little bit of everything for us. So technology, willingness to go find great talent wherever it is and leverage those things to create a firm that's efficient and not just generates revenue, but generates profit.
So let's dive into the technology a little bit. Have you always, you said you were big into math and science and engineering. Has technology always been something you're interested in, and it's sort of a natural flow that you can incorporate it into the practice, or is it something you came to later?
No, I've always been into technology. I don't remember I don't remember exactly when I got my first PC, but it was definitely, it was the black screen with green block text, and it was pre Windows days. So I remember I had the big 5.25 inch floppy drives. That's programs all ran on those. So that was my first PC. And so my parents always kind of fostered that kind of creativity and exploration into those things. And so from there, my brother and I, when we were in college, tinkered with building. It was big at that time, the TV show BattleBots. People built the fighting robots. We tinkered with building those things. So it's always kind of been part of my life, and it's just been a natural transition, or just been a natural part of my practice. I mean, even at our old firm, I was kind of constantly pushing to, let's try this new tool or that new tool. Let's see if it can improve some internal system or can improve our client satisfaction or the client journey. I've always kind of been looking for those things.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense, again, I could be completely off base here, but my sense of a traditional, normal criminal defense lawyer is that they're not into technology. They got a cell phone and a notepad, and they just get in their car and they drive around. So are you different in that way compared to some of your criminal defense brethren, do you think? And then maybe if you are, how do you think it helps your firm?
Yeah, I think there is within criminal defense, we probably have a larger percentage of attorneys in this practice area who are either solos, or maybe at most they're in some kind of expense sharing arrangement with a group of other attorneys. There aren't a lot in our area anyway, really big law firms that specialize or focus even on criminal defense. I was, again, incredibly lucky to, when I left the prosecutor's office and decided to go into criminal defense, to end up at the firm I did, because not only was it founded and run by one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the country, but it was very much run as a business. And because of that, incorporated where they could technology. They were probably one of the first firms, at least in our area, to ever have a website. And they did that pretty early on. One of the first in our area, at least in our practice area, to essentially connect to the internet. My former boss and mentor, he told me the story of how they bought a single computer and set it up in the office, and just connected that one computer to the internet so that they could access some of the early legal databases and things. And so they were traditional in a lot of sense, particularly an adherence to the billable hour model, but non-traditional in that they, where it made sense, embraced technology to improve the way they practiced and the way they served their clients. So,
real quick, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, please check out my book, The Law Firm Lifecycle. It's written for law firm owners and those who plan to be owners. In the book, I discuss various issues that come up as a law firm progresses through the stages of its growth, from just before starting a firm to when it comes to an end. The Law Firm Lifecycle is available on Amazon. Now back to the show. So you just brought up the billable hour. How do you charge your clients? Are you like many other criminal defense that do basically the retainer, or do you bill by the hour?
We are strictly a flat fee business model. It was, at the time I left the firm I was at in Wichita, I don't post a lot on LinkedIn, but I did, I think, post about this at one point. I got to the point where I really felt very burnt out. In the moment, I attributed a lot of that to just the work. I kind of specialize in high stakes, high complexity types of high severity cases. And when you have a whole caseload of those types of cases, you can imagine there's some stress that goes along with it. And so at the time, I really attributed most of it, my burnout, to that, although I knew there were some other kind of things going on. It wasn't until I left the firm and had been out for a while that, kind of time and space gives you some perspective on things, that I realized one of the big issues I had was the billable hour model for a number of reasons. Because of my background or whatever it is, I tend to try to find the most efficient ways to do things. And which means that a lot of times I can do things because I'll adopt some tool or some other technique or something that allows me to accomplish the work I need to do in less time. Well, obviously, there's a disincentive there to be efficient and to find better ways to do things. And so I never really kind of grasped that tension until I'd left the firm and had some perspective. So there was certainly that element of it. And I knew then that I didn't want that. I mean, I didn't want to live by, as I tell people, live my life in 6-minute increments. And I didn't want the burden to my clients. The other thing I would say is that, in 14 years in private practice, I was lucky enough that the vast majority of my clients were always satisfied with my services to them. And the very few conflicts I ever had with clients were about money and the bill and all of those things. And so just because of what I saw and now understand as a disincentive to find ways to be more efficient and a mismatch in incentives between lawyer and client, that, again, that's one of the things when my partner and I sat down, we agreed this was going to be a flat fee firm. We don't know how we're going to do it, particularly given the types of cases that we do that are high complexity, high severity. They often take a year, 18 months, 2 years sometimes or more to get to a resolution. We didn't know how we were going to do it, how we were going to price our cases, but we knew we were going to commit to figuring it out.
For others out there that are thinking about fixed fee type work and that have never done it, I mean, I've tried it. I do some of that, and really you just got to try it. You got to try it, make some mistakes, and you figure out how to get where you're not going to come out of the gate perfect on that. I bet you've mispriced things quite often.
We have definitely lost some money on some cases. Yeah. That's for sure. But it's again, maybe a little bit non-traditional for a lawyer in legal practice, but everything to me is kind of an experiment, and there's no reason, again, as long as it's not going to have some major adverse effect on a client, but when it comes to our internal systems, pricing, the tools we use, whatever, there's no reason not to try. I'm a big believer that there's always a better way to do things. And if you're not experimenting, you're not trying new things, you're not getting better.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a minute ago that getting burned out, the stress, and again, I mean, being a lawyer is stressful. Being a criminal defense lawyer is probably very, very stressful. So what are some of the things you do to, get out and just relieve the stress, things outside the law? What are some of the things you do?
Yeah, I guess I'll probably chalk this up as well to my philosophy background and education, but also my childhood. I mean, my parents are big outdoors people. We grew up. My mom would always joke that, she would ask my brother and I what we wanted to do for summer vacation, and most kids would be like, "Well, I go to Disneyland or this place or that place." We always just wanted to go to the lake. So that was our summer vacations usually. My parents would pack my brother and I up, and we'd go camp at, the lake, one of the lakes here in Oklahoma for a week. And so we've just always been big outdoors people. And so that's what I do for the most part. And I, again, philosophy background or whatever it may be, I do very much believe that there's a connection between mind and body. And when the body is in good shape, when the body is feeling good, the mind feels good. And I don't think there's any better way to kind of treat those two connected systems any better than just being outside. I mean, just walking out and getting a little sunshine on you is great. So that's my therapy for the most part.
Have you read that book, The Comfort Crisis?
You mentioned that to me in our early discussions, and I have to confess that I have not had a chance to read it. I did have, however, picked it up, so I will be reading it. It
is a great book. You need to get that book. You need to read it. It is, and readers or listeners, get that book. It's really fascinating book, and I'll give you sort of the layout. So the author basically takes this trip to Alaska wilderness. I mean, the outback of Alaska to hunt, caribou or whatever it is. But in between, he drops these chapters about, scientific studies and all these things that are going on in the modern world. And it's been a while since I've read it. But one of the things he says is just what you just said. He said there've been all these studies about spending time outdoors for some extended period. Now, obviously walking in the woods is good, but I mean, for extended periods of time, they do all these blood tests and all these things, and it changes people for the better. And so part of his thesis is we got to get outdoors more. So I think you're going to dig that book. It's really good.
I appreciate the recommendation. Like I said, I've picked it up, and I'm on it's on my next to read list. So.
I will say, getting to the Alaskan outback sounds scary as hell, because you got to take all these small airplane flights, and apparently they crash all the time. They're just crashing all the time. So it is not.
I've never been quite that adventurous. We aren't able to this year, but generally every year, end of October, 1st of November, I go with a friend of mine. I take my dad, and we go to the mountains in Idaho and camp for 8, 9, 10 days. And that's enough, probably right now for me, enough quote unquote wilderness. 2 years ago we were there, and the first night we were there, we got about 12 inches of snow. We were there for another 7 days, and it snowed nonstop every day, to the point that I think when we finally were able to get off the mountain, there was about 3 feet of snow.
Oh my gosh. So I was going to ask, what time of year do you take these trips? So
this one is usually either last week of October, first week of November. So you're asking for weather when you go into the mountains that time of year. But it was extreme that year for sure.
So are the bears holed up by that point? Or are they still out and about?
No, they're still out and about. So are the moose and all of that good stuff. So the area we go in the past has really been black bears. That's the bears they have there. But where we go is close enough to the Wyoming border that as the grizzly population has expanded, it's moved out. And last year, they had their first confirmed grizzly sighting in that area that we camp. But I think it's we talk about getting outside and how that the positive effect it can have on you. I may be crazy in this, but I think there's some positive effect to be had on us when we go out somewhere and we're not necessarily at the top of the food chain. My wife and I scuba dive. I think there's a little bit of that involved in that too. So love seeing sharks, but you just kind of know that I'm not the top predator in this environment. There's something humbling and I think good about it.
I didn't really know this till fairly recently. People told me that, and again, I could be completely wrong, but moose are like more dangerous than the bears. I don't know.
That's exactly true. We have a lot of moose where we go and camp, and I am generally far more concerned. I give moose a much wider berth than I would, certainly black bear. They are territorial. They don't care who or what you are. You need to get out of their way. So.
And they're so big, man. They're huge.
You don't, until you see one kind of up close and in person, you don't realize how big they are. They are very large animals.
I've not seen one in person, but I've seen footage of them walking down like the median of a road next to the cars, and you're like, holy crap, that thing is huge.
Yeah.
All right, well, cool. Let's switch back to the firm. So you've started your firm. I don't know, how many years ago did you start it?
So my solo practice I started in roughly June of 2022.
And then Triad Legal, when did that start?
Officially, that would have been April of 24. So
okay,
we're not quite 2 years into what is now Triad Legal, the criminal defense firm.
So let's talk about marketing. Let's talk about that a little bit. So how do you and your partner go about marketing your practice? And I imagine some of the same principles apply depending on the practice area, but maybe there's some different nuances for a criminal defense practice.
Given the nature of our practice and the types of cases we focus on, they're not the kind of lower severity, higher volume type cases. So, paid advertising, Google ads, LSAs, those types of things haven't really been something we've focused on. Instead, we have focused on, I love all things technology and like new and shiny, but there are some principles that whether you're in criminal defense or estate planning or you name it, that still kind of apply. And that is, there's nothing like personal relationships. And so we've really focused time and attention, not entirely, but a good bit of our time and attention on those personal relationships for the people that, again, just like when I was in estate planning, going and finding the real estate agents. We try to make sure we maintain relationships with the family law attorneys in our jurisdictions and other attorneys and other people, bondsmen, attorneys, you name it, that can and have sent us business in the past, and we try to nurture those relationships because I like data. I would say we're working on it, collecting the kind of marketing data we need to make more informed decisions. But I do know, based on the data we have from this firm and what I knew from 14 years of practice before that, our best cases, our best clients, our most valuable cases come from referrals. And so that's really where we focused on, which is a very low-tech thing to talk about. But some things change and some things never do.
So another question I have, so you have high severity cases, so I assume the pool of potential lawyers is probably smaller that do those cases. That probably helps. You get a personal referral. But the other element is they may be thrown in jail on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. kind of thing. How do you handle the intake and dealing with these off-hour emergency call type situations?
At our intake, like a lot of things in our firm, is a continual work in process. But one thing, again, going back to the principles that my partner and I sit down and agreed on, one of those principles was that there would be a live human being that would answer our phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so during the day, during business hours, we have internal team member reception that answers calls, but we also have a fallback. We have a virtual reception service that catches any overflow calls during the day and is available after hours. So, when it comes to criminal defense, and that's the thing that sets it apart from certainly like estate planning and some of the other practices, when someone knows they need a criminal defense attorney, they need that attorney right now. They're not thinking about getting in trouble and thinking about hiring an attorney for something they're going to do down the road. Or a lot of times a loved one has been arrested or the cops are at the door with a warrant. And so there's an immediate need. And so the one thing we can do is answer the phone. And again, that sounds very low tech, but interestingly, if you look at, Clio puts out every year their legal trends report. If you look over their report, even as recently as last year, the percentage of firms that even during regular business hours don't answer their phone is outrageous. And so just by having a live human being, even if it's a virtual reception service, that can answer the phone and be that first human voice that person hears that says, we're here to help you. You're on your way to having a client at that point.
I agree with that completely. So let me ask the next question. So you've committed to have a live human answer that's not you. How do you deal with the late night emergency? Does it get directed to a lawyer, to you? Do you have rules about, hey, I'm just not going to answer the phone? We've got to take a message. How do you handle that part of it?
So the way it works right now is they don't contact us or transfer it directly, but it gets fed into our CRM system, and then we get, both my partner and I right now get a message on our phones that says, basically, here's the caller, here's what they're calling about. And then whoever sees it first picks up. First thing we do is we can see that and determine, is this an emergency? And when cops are at the door, we've been doing this long enough, we see the signs of what a real emergency is. And if it is, one of us picks up the phone and calls the person. If it's not an emergency, the virtual reception always offers the person, so if it's on a Saturday, they offer a Monday morning a call with the attorney. So before that person gets off the phone, they have a call set up with the attorney, but they're told that, we'll let the attorney know, and if we can, we'll get back to them before. So
Okay.
In the shopping cycle, it's a much shorter sales cycle with criminal defense. And again, if you can answer the phone, have some compassion for the person, and get them at least scheduled for a call, a lot of times you stop the shopping process. They may not then go to the next attorney they had on their list to call. So for us, it's really about interjecting and stopping the shopping process. Because a lot of people, they may, even if we get a referral, they may have contacted 2 or 3 people in their social network, and they may have 2, 3, 4 names of attorneys. So we may not be the only one they're contacting. And so, answer your phone, which a lot of particularly criminal defense attorneys don't do because it may simply ring to their cell phone. But have a live person answer, show some compassion, and get them scheduled for a consultation. And we found that to be pretty successful so far.
For a minute there, I thought maybe you had found a way to marry your early desire to be a doctor with lawyers. So you're on call, It's your
yeah, I mean, we are essentially on call, but we don't, I think it's something I've learned through my practice. And again, I think learned through paying attention to some other really smart people. I know you had a conversation not too long ago with Regina Edwards, family law attorney in Georgia. And, I took a lot of stuff from her and her communications policies. And, one thing I got from her in her milieu was that there are very few things that are a true emergency. And so we've kind of taken that approach. There really aren't a lot of things that are such a true emergency that, I or my partner or anybody else in the firm needs to immediately, get up out of bed and make the call. As we do, but for the most part, we've been pretty fortunate. It seems to have worked. Again, live person answer the call, show some compassion, get them scheduled for the very next possible time for an attorney to talk to them.
So we're starting to run towards the end of our time here, but there's no way I'm going to get to all my questions here. But
I have been a time or two in my career accused by a judge and a prosecutor here or there of being a bit verbose. So,
well, no, this is the fun part, and I always prepare way more than I can ask. But I do want to ask, so you've had an interesting career. So you've gone through the pivot, and you started your firm and all these things. As you look back on it, for other lawyers out there that may be thinking about starting a firm or thinking about a pivot or whatever, do you have any advice that maybe you'd give them?
Oh, goodness. How long do we have? Yeah, I would. And this may, again, sound somewhat contradictory to everything I've said in terms of my appreciation and love of all things technology and new and fancy. But really, it is the basics are the things that matter. Law firms are a business. We are, yes, professionals. Everything they teach us in law school about, this is a noble profession and all of that is all true. But at the end of the day, these are businesses and you have to treat them that way. And no business operates without customers. So you can have the fanciest technology, the fanciest systems, SOPs, and all that other good stuff that a business ultimately needs to run and survive and grow and scale. But if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. And so anybody who's going to go out on their own, because again, I think I was way naive in my view of how easy it was going to be to get those customers. Have a plan in place for what are you going to do? Unless you leave in some big firm, you got a big nest egg, or you've got some family investment to get you, plenty of money to do all the fancy websites and things like that, paid advertising, whatever it may be. Most of us starting out in this are on a very limited budget, sometimes shoestring budget. And so you have to find the things, kind of guerrilla tactics to find those clients. And that, again, goes back to those principles. Just like I mentioned, lucked out, my wife's a real estate agent, connection, go talk to real estate agents. You're a criminal defense attorney, go find out if your local bar association, what the family law bar is doing, and go to one of their events and sponsor one of their social gatherings, do something like that. Find a way to connect to the people who know your clients. And those are the ones that are going to send you business.
Great advice.
Everything else gets built on top of that.
Yeah. Great advice. All right. So last question. What's your favorite thing about having your own firm and being able to run your own firm?
Wow, there's a lot. I think probably what it boils down to is, I've always kind of been a bit of an independent, contrarian, do things my own way kind of person. And to me, having your own firm means you get to build it in your image. You get to do things the way you want to do them, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? We get to say we're going to be a flat fee model and we're going to stick to it. And so, does it make sense? Does other people say you're crazy for doing that? Maybe, but you know what? It's mine, so I get to do it that way.
Well, I love that. We're going to end with that. Trevor, again, thanks for coming on, sharing a little bit about your journey. And for anybody out there that wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
I am probably the best way for attorneys and others to find me is probably LinkedIn. I'm not nearly as active there as our friend Ron would like me to be, or as he tells me I should be, in terms of at least active posting and things like that. It's on one of my rocks for this year is to be more active on LinkedIn. But I am on LinkedIn, and if somebody messages me or wants to contact me, it's usually the best way.
Well, again, Trevor, thanks for coming on. It's been real fun, and look forward to seeing you on LinkedIn.
Privilege, Jonathan. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to come and chat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.